Good evening. Welcome to episode 45 of the Political Mike podcast. I am so excited about this episode because there's so much going on right now. And we've got Democratic infighting between Senators Manchin and Sinema and the rest of the caucus over the size of the reconciliation package that leave Republicans with what seems to be some leverage. Should he go or should he stay seems to be the question on the minds of Californians as they are preparing to head to the polls with California's recall on the verge, on the horizon. And a political analysis of recently released election data shows that some wider, wealthier neighborhoods were more likely to employ the new ranking system than lower income areas of New York City, many of which are home to Black and Latino, and as well as Asian American communities. And America is on the verge of marking 20 years since the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Here to help me break all of this down are a distinct group of cutting-edge minds, innovative thinkers, and I'm excited to introduce them to you at this moment. We have, for the first time here, Mr. Daniel Chandler. Daniel Chandler is a native of Madison, Mississippi, a suburb of Jackson, the capital. Upon graduating from high school, he attended Oakwood University and graduated with a degree in political science and a minor in chemistry. After that, Daniel completed a non-thesis master's degree in economics, emphasizing the global market. He then went on to medical school, working on that, and a master's in business administration. So Daniel, thanks for being here. He and I were suite mates in college. I'm excited to have him here. Looking forward to what he's going to bring to the table. We also have Miss Blake Bibbs. Blake is a graduate student and young professional who is a native of Raleigh, North Carolina. Blake's involvement with politics began at the age of 11 when she was advocating for the Affordable Care Act. After that, she served in leadership roles for the North Carolina Association of Teen Democrats. In addition to being a part of the organizations like these, Blake has also worked with several North Carolina campaigns and worked as a political intern for the Democratic National Committee. She is now employed as a scheduler and executive assistant for a congressional member. She has been there for some time now. I believe it's about to be a year. She has already been hard at work in terms of rising in the ranks of her political aspirations, and she manages her members' daily schedule and keeps up with administrative duties within her office. Blake, it's always a pleasure to have you. Glad to have you back. I think the last time we had you was during the January 6th breach of the Capitol. So I'm glad to have you back after so much has happened since then. We also have Oliver Toulousma, a good friend of mine. First time here. I'm excited to have him. He's a spoken word poet and public speaker who was the 2021 to 2023 Equal Justice Works Fellow at the Community Justice Project. He earned his Juris Doctorate this year at the Florida A&M University College of Law in Orlando, Florida. He earned his Bachelor's of Arts degree in political science from the University of Florida in 2018, and where he worked as a research coordinator for the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program for almost 2 years. His writing and work focus on critiquing legal and political systems of power that target marginalized communities, life as a member of the Black diaspora, Black male vulnerability, allyship from other marginalized identities, the American and global South. Oliver, thanks for being here, man. And we've got Miss Ariana Patton, who's no stranger to the political mic at all. Glad to have you back, Ariana, who is now a 3L at Thurgood Marshall School of Law, a native of Ellenwood, Georgia. She began her political journey during her senior year of high school, where she had the opportunity to intern for the late Congressman John Lewis. After interning for John Lewis, she remained in the political field by receiving her Bachelor's of Arts degree in political science from Spelman and obtaining internships with the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, Planned Parenthood Public Policy Division, Coca-Cola, Toyota, Government Affairs, and L'Oreal USA. She is currently the owner of a political Instagram account at The Black Girl Politico. I would encourage you to follow it. And it educates her followers on the political process. And she is looking forward to becoming a member of Congress. Ariana, thanks for being back. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Oliver Davis, who served 12 years, 3 consecutive terms on the South Bend Common City Council after he was first elected in 2007. He worked hard to represent the people of South Bend, Indiana. On November 22nd, 2019, he endorsed Vice President Joe Biden for president in the 2020 general election. He was an outspoken spokesperson for the Biden campaign. He announced on January 29th of last year, 2020, that he would challenge the incumbent Dave Thomas for the St. Joseph County Commissioner District 2 seat. Although he was unsuccessful, he continues to play an active role in the community of South Bend. I'm looking forward to having him here back as well. Impressive panelist. So thank you all for being here. I want to open up the conversation with a question pertaining to the reconciliation negotiations that are ongoing on Capitol Hill. Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, is brushing off Joe Manchin's call for a strategic pause on Democrats' spending agenda, vowing that the party will not slow its pursuit of a $3.5 trillion bill tackling climate change, tax policy, and beefing up social programs. Senator Schumer said, "We're moving full speed ahead." He told that to reporters yesterday morning. The Senate Majority Leader's remarks signal very little concern, it seems, with Manchin's hardline position against the $3.5 trillion bill. Manchin, of course, is claiming that he's concerned about the size and scope of this bill. He's trying to position himself as the fiscally conservative, responsible member of Congress right now in these negotiations, member of the Democratic caucus. And Senator Kyrsten Sinema seems to be following right in his footsteps. So I want to ask you, all panelists, will a compromise among Senate Democrats to win over Senators Manchin and Sinema to avoid a veto, would that actually pay off for the GOP and narrow the Democrats' ultimate spending ambitions moving forward? Now, keep in mind, Senator Mitch McConnell seems to have his hands rubbing together, because he also said, look, I pray for them every night. He's talking about Senators Sinema and Senator Manchin. He said, I wish them well. We give them lots of love. He enjoys a close relationship with Manchin. What say you?
What say I is that Manchin is going to be he's almost at the tail end of his ability to speak out. And I'm going to tell you why. The infrastructure bill is going to have a lot of carrots and food and celery. And this is dinner time for everybody around my part of the world. And there's going to be a lot of food for the people of West Virginia. And when you look into what Secretary Granholm said last night on an interview about how many of those potential jobs can come to the state of West Virginia, there was a tremendous amount of jobs that she quoted that could be a part of this infrastructure bill. That if Manchin goes ahead and votes against it, it is going to create a tremendous amount of backlash for him. And he's going to have to pay for that. One of the things that used to happen on Capitol Hill is we used to have what they call earmarks, and that has gone away. But this is kind of a mentality that so many of the senators have different kind of candy in it for their own people back home. And to vote against that, it won't be seen as they're voting against Biden and they're voting against Vice President Harris. And they will be voting to get rid of the candy that everybody else is having. And when people start seeing that other states had this and we don't have it because of our senator, even the Republicans in West Virginia are going to have to wake up and say, okay, we're going to get hurt. That is why you see McConnell being very cautious, because a lot of this candy is even for the state of Kentucky. And the more you can sweeten this to have candy for every single spot of all of the 50 states, then it's going to be more difficult as time goes by, as we get closer to the 2022 election, for them to say we're not going to have the candy. Okay, it's easy right now because they may have just left the dentist's place, but soon they're going to get away from that dentist and they want that candy back. And once they get that candy, it's going to be sweet.
Anyone else? And we're tackling on whether or not it was politically wise, or not politically wise, but whether or not in the long run, if Democrats go ahead and try to get down to still a smaller package than what they initially were planning to pass, this $3.5 trillion bill by, I believe, September or was the date, the month they were looking at to get that passed. Would that actually work in favor of the GOP?
I would say, I don't think that there is a place for them or a room for them to really even compromise anymore. I know when looking at people like, you had Warren and Senator Sanders, who wanted to go as much as 6 trillion. So I think 3.5, that's basically half of it, and there's so much in there which could serve as a major benefit to just so many people that are underprivileged. I think with things in regards to tuition and Pell Grants and even like rural development. I lived in a rural community. I was also an independent college student who relied on those grants. Those are things that could impact me, and clean technology. And another thing too is, childcare. I think that's a really big thing. And I think closing in the gap on that would be huge. I remember in college, I had a job at Applebee's, and there was a lady that worked there, and I remember she could literally only work certain shifts. And the reason why is because she was trying to find someone who could watch her kids and stuff. And for her, and I think the person at one point was no longer able to watch her kids. And she wound up, basically, she couldn't even work anymore because the cost of childcare was more than what she was actually making. And so she couldn't afford it. So I think having aspects such of that in the program, and helping out with like kids or pre-K for kids that are 3 and 4 and things like that are huge, and it's a major asset. So I don't think when we have issues such as like that on the line, that there really is much room for negotiation.
Yeah, I agree with like in Dr. Davis. I think that to put this all into perspective, West Virginia is a poor state, and Manchin, with him wanting to negotiate to a lower bill or lower infrastructure bill, it's as if he's like speaking as if he's living in a rich state. And unfortunately, that's not, his reality. And so to see that, he's pressuring for a lower bill, America can't handle that. We need that $3.5 trillion to go towards, the caregivers. They said they were giving $400 billion towards that, the child tax credit. We are currently still in a pandemic and we're continuing to be in a pandemic. There's so many different strands out right now. And we need the, we need for this infrastructure bill. I mean, it's like technically it's another stimulus bill, and we went months without one. So it's important that we do have this. Like Blake was saying, there's no room for negotiation. It's either we have this bill or we don't have the bill. And unfortunately, what will it look like if we don't have the bill? So it's, I think it's time that, Manchin, I think this is a wrong move for him, because everything, the, child tax credit, the free community college for 2 years, this is all going to help those that are in West Virginia, so to even say, what will be cut if they do, negotiate down to, let's say, a $2 trillion bill or a $1.5 trillion bill, that's not a good political move for him in the future.
Yeah. Can everybody hear me? I just want to make sure. Okay. Yeah, so I'm in agreement with everyone here on the panel. I'm going to touch on infrastructure, because for me, that is the most important. Coming from Mississippi, living in Alabama with Mike, and then now living in Tennessee, it's just desperately needed. I mean, we had a bridge going from Nashville to Memphis that had like a crack in it, and it was just, they couldn't even use it for like a month. Like, no one said anything, it was just quiet. And everyone was like, I'm not even sure if it got fixed, to be honest. So like on my drive back home to Mississippi, I'm looking around trying to see if this is the crack that's just going to, drop my car down and I'm not going to be able to move, because infrastructure is just so delayed. Like as you get further down in the South, we don't have the ability to get the things that we need. So this infrastructure is like the biggest piece for me that really stuck out. And we've already compromised once. Like, I'm just not here for further compromise at this point. So, I'm just in agreement with what the panel is saying right now.
First, thank you for having me on, Mike. And what I'm about to say, and my thoughts tonight do not reflect the views of my employer, my sponsors, or any of the future clients that I will be serving here in Miami. I just had to put that disclaimer out there. I'm not sure what what may be the most politically expedient thing for Senator Manchin to do. What I do understand is that probably each person on this panel and anybody watching here tonight watched New Orleans underwater, watched New York underwater. Down here in Florida, we're constantly combating red tide. Down here in Florida, we have over 1 million people that are at risk of eviction, and it's essentially, the benevolence of local mayors, because obviously our governor is not doing, I'll leave that. We're essentially beholden to the benevolence of local leaders and folk who are just trying to, reach agreements with their landlords to fail to, to not be evicted from their homes and, their places of businesses. So I'm not sure, we have the luxury of waiting for the, political will of one man or two people, excuse me, no disrespect to Senator Sinema, to, push for $3.5 trillion. It honestly should be more. But 3.5 trillion is honestly the floor. It was below the floor, but it's the floor. So yeah, I wouldn't budge on $3.5 trillion.
The thing that, I'm glad you brought that out, Oliver, because the headlines literally last week was just how bad the folks who were, victims of Hurricane Ida have it in terms of, lack of power. And I'm glad you brought the infrastructure component part of it, Daniel, because even with this bill, there is a proposal to have hurricane relief included in this reconciliation package. And so the argument is, if we're including these things that the American people not only want, but need, right? Polling aside, what's in the best interests of getting folks out of this ditch? What is the conservative argument? And remember, in my view, this is the same Manchin who was still willing to go close to the edge with Trump when it came down to spending for the border wall. And when it came down to those negotiations, when we're talking about DACA and immigration reform and everything, and there was always a price tag for this border wall attached that never seemed to be too high for any of the Republicans. And for Manchin, at least, they seemed to be the one guy that was trying to meet Trump more in the middle than anyone else. So it's interesting to see now this whole argument turn on its head again. And all of a sudden, we're wearing the traditional hats of fiscal conservatives and moderates. And it's so easy to lose sight of where we were just a few short years ago. But I do want to ask, what are these senators getting out of, taking this position? What do you think their end goal is in not just stalling negotiations, but actually looking to damage the chances of this bill actually being 3.5 trillion? Bernie Sanders, like Ariana pointed out, wanted $6 trillion, which was astronomically high. But what do you think their end goal is here?
For Manchin, I believe that his goal is to try to show to the people of West Virginia that he's a better Republican than they could even have. So go continue to vote for him. And I come from a state of Indiana, and we have both of our delegations, of course, are Republicans. Our last Democratic senator, who I knew very well, many people felt that he tried to play too far to the right. And by doing that, it burnt him. And therefore, the people said, well, we're going to run a real Republican. Let's get a real Republican. And they went ahead and got a real Republican instead of the Democrat. And I think these kind of situations are going to show to those who like to call themselves the blue dog kind of crowd, they're not going to be able to stay out there that long now as the infrastructure bill starts coming. And you see the roads and you see all of the different tangible things that people can see. When you say politics in general, people say, I don't like politics. But people like to be able to drive safely. They want to be able to have the correct needs that take care of their own house, their own childcare, their own bills, all the different building up of the repairs of all of the hurricane and everything else. When people can put the funding into their own table, into their own house, into their own job, and they can see it, all of a sudden, that's what is going to make it real. And when the average person, the average woman, the average man, the average child can understand it, then they're going to vote that person out who is standing in front of them. But they still see it as this 3.5 million billion or whatever trillion. They can't see that. But once they can see that means meat and potatoes, that's my job. At that point, that's going to change. And if that means that the Democrats will lose a vote and then they will have to come back and win it in 2022, fine. But what I think that Senator, our majority leader, is trying to force this down their throat in a sense, because we got to clear up those Democrats who've been playing around with the Republican Party too long.
And I would also add too on it, I think what we're really seeing is members straddling the fence in regards to where their alliance or their allegiances. They still want to hold on to the Dem name and be a part of the Dem party, but obviously they're choosing things that may not align with Dem values or looking in at the best interest of the people. I think in regards to not wanting the 3.5 trillion, I think you look at somebody like Manchin, who he was just talking about too, has straddled the fence of being on that Republican side as well in his district. And then also Sinema, who had an interesting race coming into the Senate as well. And so I think with them, we're just seeing them not just fully stepping out and representing the values of a lot of the people that really, fought for them to get those positions, even outside of just their districts. I know Sinema, when she was running, I know that was just such a big election. So there's so many other people at large who are also pulling and supporting for her as well. And I think in this, I don't think she's also being cognizant of a lot of those people's opinions and views as well.
Often, whenever I hear folks criticizing presidents, regardless of party, Democrat, Republican, I always say, the president's only as good as the Congress they have. You hear a lot of folks criticize Obama for not going further on social justice or further on this or further on that. And then you're starting to hear those kind of criticisms return now that we're in the presidency of Joe Biden. But I want to ask, is the Biden administration doing enough to persuade these senators to get back on their side, to get back in line? Don't all speak at once.
I'll take a shot at this one. I kind of struggle with this question, Mike, if I'm being honest, because I'm just like at a certain point, just look at where we're at. It's just like at a certain point, we bring together a package that, has shown, proof that it's going to increase the job market, is going to do these things for specifically certain senators in areas where they can take this back to their constituents and tell them, like, I did this, this is what's helpful and stuff like that. And we discussed Manchin in that aspect. We're in a pandemic where, everything's kind of bottoming out. So I'm just like, what is it that they would need to really sweeten the deal is kind of what I'm struggling to kind of think about. So if you ask, like, what kind of package or what can we offer that isn't already being on the table, it's just like, it's like, hey, at a certain point, sometimes you go forward in good faith, considering what we can do on the back end. Because that's what we have to, at this point, we're so late in the game speaking about the midterms and things like that. We just, how about we, do this now? Let's worry about the other things on the back end. It's kind of, where I'm at on that one.
Yeah, and you have people who said, look, we voted for Biden, who promised to be this negotiator, this seasoned senator. Going back to Lyndon Johnson, you haven't had a president that was this exposed to the legislature, not just the legislative as a whole, but the Senate specifically. Someone who's a senator at heart, a legislator who was elected in, I believe, 72. He was in there from 73 to 2008. Someone who knows senators intimately and knows their families, knows how to get folks down to the table and hash it out. Is it fair criticism to say, look, we are not getting what we thought we were getting when we voted for this president?
I think this, when you look at Vice President Lyndon Johnson, look at the way he was voted in 1964. He had a landslide victory in 1964. He was coming off the assassination of President Kennedy. The country was going through a major change of Vietnam War, everything else. When you look at how President Biden came in office, the Congress, the House lost seats. So the Republicans across the country did very well. And it came down to a few states when we have to even look at having to rely on the state of Georgia for us to even have the leadership. And Georgia is not a reliably strong Democratic state for us to rely on. I mean, city of Atlanta is wonderful, but not the state of Georgia for us to have to rely on. And so we came in at this with the right at the teeth, skinny piece of our teeth. And yet we want to feel like we are this powerful Lyndon Johnson kind of presidency. We're not there. And so, and that's the issue we have to realize, that we are not there and that's why we have when we rely on Arizona, who we basically got help from McCain's wife because of the battle that she had with the Trump family. And we were beneficiaries of a Republican fight that came our way. Those are the issues that we face. And so when you come in after a Republican fight, and we were the beneficiaries of that, we then are at the level where we are. We are not on the far left side of the Bernie Sanders wing or AOC wing. We are right there, right at that line. And that's what gives these kind of people like the Cinemas and the Manchins power, because of that issue. But that's not going to last that long once we have the infrastructure. The infrastructure, again, is going to bring everybody home.
And I will also say, too, just adding on to what you said as well, I do think in this election, we did see, that there was, a couple days where a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, are we even going to pull it through? I know I was one of those people. And I think what a lot of us were maybe hoping for after the election and everything that happened is that America would come out in droves and vote against Trump, which we didn't see happen. And I know a lot of people felt as though, we're just personally offended by it, because they felt as though the nation wasn't moving in the direction they want to in condemning supremacy and things like that. But I would say with that, I think that the Biden administration also, and I think even with Biden running too, we knew that he was, not as, or, his views were a little bit more towards the moderate side than some of the other candidates. So I think that's one thing also to keep in mind too. When he was running, we did know that. And also, as you said, what the circumstances are. And then the other thing that I wanted to state is, I think, yes, we might have opinions about the things that are going on publicly and what we see as far as the Biden administration pushing for things in that light. But I think we also, a lot of us, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes as well. We don't know what phone calls are being made, what kind of negotiations and adjustments are trying to be made as well. And so that's another thing that I would say to be cognizant of, because especially with Biden's passion for like Build Back Better and things like that, I could be wrong, but I don't see the administration just being like, we'll just take this L. I would at least be hopeful that they are trying to do more. But I mean, then we really don't know. So that's another thing to consider as well. And also just considering, what we kind of knew also going into electing him as president.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as far as like sweetening the deal, I think that kind of going back to what Daniel said, I think this is the sweetened deal, especially for Manchin, and being that, he is representing a poor state. I think that this package would be able to help, all states, all of the states, and specifically the states that in which the representatives are, or the senators are, pushing back on it. But I think that I definitely think that the Biden administration can do a lot better as it relates to, I guess, kind of pushing the bill, or like, I guess having some type of backdoor conversations in which to help. But I don't know what else that they could possibly do. I think that, like I said, we're currently in a pandemic. So at this point, it's okay, what can we do to help the citizens of America rather than to help ourselves? Because I think now this is it's a little selfish, like our lives are at stake, and we're waiting on something, we still have an influx of job loss. We still have, the pandemic. We're still rolling out vaccinations. So like things are still happening, and we're sitting here and waiting at the fate of these politicians to help us out. And it's like, at this point, what can you guys do for us? We're electing you. We're asking you to represent us, and you guys are, playing the game of, oh, I want to wait until this person helps me out, or I'm waiting for, the Biden administration to come with a better deal. It's at this point, it's let's push it out, and then let's, unfortunately, we'll have to deal with the repercussions, but things are still happening. Life is still going on while these negotiations are happening.
And I can say too, adding on to that, I do admire Schumer too, for, even though it might be very hard and there might be some, it may not happen, but putting that hard deadline down as a way to try and enforce and put the pressure on people versus keep pushing it back. So I think that's one thing that I am appreciative of. But I do think it's definitely going to be an interesting and rocky road to watch and follow.
I'm honestly disappointed in I don't think that they're doing enough to try to, when you say, I feel like there's a problem with, okay, the idea of getting Sinema and Manchin back in line, and what does that mean, and whose voices are being centered. Sinema and Manchin, at least in this iteration of their political careers, are centering a very particular voice and trying to appeal to a very certain type of audience. And I think it's problematic because in this, attempt, and part of the reason why Joe Biden was elected in the first place, to be this adult in the room, what happens and where are we putting our political power? So instead of, for example, you talked about, Mike, a little bit earlier, Lyndon Johnson in the 60s, kind of the base of this power comes in part with the massive expansion of social and political rights for a large, millions of people, Black Americans, essentially people who are not white, in the 60s. But when you kind of get another two-term Democratic president in the 90s with Bill Clinton, this idea of being, let's moderate ourselves, let's work from both sides, it gets us 3 strikes. It gets us this proliferation of prisons in the United States. It gets us, by virtue of that, the degradation of, civil liberties, Fourth Amendment, First Amendment rights. And it's like, I don't know. When we try to focus on looking like the adults and trying to be civil and not just tell it how it is and speak truth to power, this is what happens. We put our political, and by not just this idea of a game and like how many votes we can get, we're putting people's lives into the hands of folk who wouldn't necessarily be on our side anyways. So what are we doing here? That's what I think. I'm sorry.
And I want to add to, it's hard to negotiate with folks whose sole strategic mission is to obstruct you. We're not even dealing with the same political climate of the 60s, 70s, 80s, or even the 90s, when folks were interested in, Dr. Davis?
Well, one thing you have to look at, and I'm glad the other Oliver, it's nice to be on the panel with another person named Oliver.
I was thinking the same thing.
But, when you talk about, let's look at Lyndon Johnson. Okay, we get all these things passed in 64 and 68. Then we lose the 68 election. We lose the 72 election. We barely win the 76 election. We lose the 80 election. We lose the 84 election. We lose the 88 election. And we get a surprise in 92. Okay? And so basically what they are afraid of, and this goes back to your points, we had this big grand thing in the 60s, and the next elections we lost. After that, we grew up. I mean, I was born from that standpoint into where Republicans controlled the White House basically for a long period of time, except for a little bit of Carter and back to Republicans. And so the thing is, the question is, do you have this big grand plan and you win it now, and for the next 20 years, we end up losing again? And so those are the things that, how far of social liberalism do you use to push it and you win, and then you got to pay for that loss. And so we got, we won the 60s, and then we, in the 70s and the 80s, and even up into Bill Clinton time, we had to pay for all of that. And you were right. By the time the Democrats showed up, there was a different level of Democrats that came in there. So that's the question now. We pushed this big program, then where do we go? So those are the kind of things that I think you have to look at when you look at history and how that comes into the game.
And to that point, Dr. Davis, I do think, though, that era between 68 and even if you can go back up to the Obama years, I mean, I think that era, you could characterize that as the Reagan era, in that folks who are accepting this idea that government is the problem, government intervention is wrong, or something to be feared, or because it's obstruction. It's obstruction. But I do think that people are expecting more from the government now. We're seeing it in the way that poll after poll shows that high records of Americans were in support, regardless of party, for the COVID relief packages under Trump and Biden. You're seeing it in the amount of people who are supporting the infrastructure package. You're seeing in the amount of people who are, supporting even the reconciliation bill that includes all of these goodies that are going to address the economy, address the environment, address infrastructure, address education. I think that we may be entering into this new phase, and I think the Biden administration, the Biden team, may be catching wind here that, look, we're in a new phase in the United States. We're in the third decade of the 21st century. What worked in the 80s and 90s, the political ideas back then may not be the ones that voters today may have. So let's capitalize on that. And then when people like it, like they do the Affordable Care Act, they're not going to want to let that go. And that's going to be like a staple in American legislative history. And they're going to reward us accordingly. What do you say?
Oh, sorry, Dr. Oliver. I kind of wanted to jump in right there real quick. So I am a fan of aggressive politics. I would rather just throw it to the wall, and then if that means I don't get elected for 15 years, well, you got 15 years to take it all back. If you can do it, then I wish you the best of luck, because that's just how I feel. I mean, at a certain point, like Mike said, it's like, if we create a system where like they have in India, where the whole country has free Wi-Fi and people have connectivity to and access to things, and you try to repeal that back, it's gonna, the repeal sometimes look worse than the rollout. And so I would rather take the risk of the rollout sometimes than to just simply compromise at this point. It's just like when they had the original package, everyone was talking about the Amtrak stuff, that if they were going to run a train from Louisiana, New Orleans to Atlanta, and then from Atlanta up, and all this kind of place. I was like, if you start working on that and then they try to stop it midway, like it's the border wall or something, that's never going to happen. That's going to just screw up everything. So it's just easier to me. I was kind of a precocious kid, so I'm just going to do it, and then I'll tell you sorry later. That's just how I do politics as well. So I'm just, that's just how I feel about that. I don't know what you say to that, Dr. Davis.
I agree with that kind of philosophy, but the only issue that you got to face is the fact that the way it's structured with all the gerrymandering that goes on and everything else. Because I agree with you, Mike, that the polls are saying that people love these kind of situations. You got 80% loving this and 80. I mean, think about it. The majority of Americans are wanting some kind of action against the gun violence and gun control, but try to get that passed through Congress. Okay, the way it's set up. But even though polls say that people love it, the thing about it is we are at a state where the polls are saying one thing, but then the parties are saying, we like it, but we don't like who's leading it. If Trump's leading it, then we'll vote for you. Or if Biden's leading it, then we'll vote for you. So we are now into the personality of who's leading it. We like the issue. Everybody loves the issue. Okay, we all want our roads fixed. We all want this done. We all want that done. But we want the Trump people to lead it, or we want the Biden people to lead it. That's really the issue. The issue is not fighting over necessarily the issue of the road or the issue of the child care. It's who's going to administer it. Will a Republican lead it out? Oh, fine. If a Republican leads it out, I'm all with it, Manchin. Now, if a Democrat leads it out, well, we got to look at it. We got to study it a little more. And then vice versa. So that's where we are. We're into more of a personality kind of issue, more so than the policy. Policies and what the details of the policies everybody likes. Who's leading it out? That's what the split. That's how I look at that.
I do want to turn our attention. Time is moving so fast tonight to the California recall that is set to take place this upcoming Tuesday. You have Governor Gavin Newsom now facing, I believe this is the sixth attempt to have a recall. You have some candidates, but at the top of the GOP list, poll after poll shows, is this gentleman, Larry Elder, who has, Larry, he's an interesting guy. And this is why. Larry Elder befriended the gentleman who was behind Trump's immigration policy, Steve Miller, and even suggested that Steve Miller would make a wonderful president someday. Steve Miller, who was the architect behind that policy of separating children from their parents with no plan at all to reunite them, and intentionally so. Larry Elder, conservative talk show host, he has a big social media presence. He's raised more money than any of the other candidates. But you also have Kevin Faulconer, who is the mayor of San Francisco, I believe, who was more moderate. He actually opposed Trump's immigration policies. You have John Cox, who ran against Newsom before in the past gubernatorial election. You have Caitlyn Jenner, who is a celebrity, and you have interesting folks in this race. But the one thing you don't have is a situation like in 2003 where you have an Arnold Schwarzenegger. You do not have a dominating force in this race to take over. I mean, Larry Elder, he's the leading candidate, but he's no Schwarzenegger. I don't know how else to say it, but I do want to ask if you think, in your view, if Larry Elder can actually appeal to folks, to Californians beyond just the GOP base.
I don't think so. Although, Newsom messed up, I think that Larry Elder, California is still facing a lot of things. They're still facing, climate control. They're still facing homelessness and high taxes. And I think that they know that. And I think that all of this, the backlash is really coming from, Newsom doing the, dining with lobbyists and, being mask free, and, people being upset about that because he was saying that, you need to mask up. So I think this is like backlash. I think that Newsom definitely has, I think he's going to win by a landslide. I don't think Elder, although he's running a great campaign, I don't think that he has a chance. And I think that, and if he does, the consequences of that, just to think of, California being that deep blue state and losing control a year before the midterm elections, and like how that's going to look for the U.S. Senate. Senator Feinstein's been in since 19 whenever, she's 80. And so if, and her term ends in 2025. And so if, let's say that Elder does win, he would have to appoint if she steps down. And then what would that look like as California that's, been historically a deep blue state now being a red state. So, this election it's going to be a hard election.
And what's interesting with this election, too, is that both sides are nationalizing this election. You have Kamala Harris, the vice president, coming in yesterday saying, look, the Republicans want this recall because they think that what's going to happen here is going to be a bellwether. What happens here is going to be replicated across the country. Then you have Larry Elder, to your point, Ariana, saying, look, if I get in there, I'm going to take Feinstein out. I had other questions about that, regardless, he's making promises to nationalize and to take away the Democrats' slim majority in the Senate. And by doing this, I'm wondering if this is going to be enough to galvanize enough, may not be Republicans, but moderate, conservative leaning Californians to actually make a dent. Look, it's California at the end of the day, right? But if you get past a certain percentage, could that serve as a bellwether for what's to come in the 22 midterms?
I think as a graduate of USC, where we fight on in LA, I think the best thing that is happening with 2021 is what happened in 2003. In 2003, people took it for granted. They didn't think that Arnold had a chance. And so nobody really planned for him. Gray Davis sat down and said, hey, there's no way this actor, he's well known, but he's not going to come beat me. So you didn't see the national parties come together to kind of fight for him. There was not this big push to try to save California, anything like that. It was like, he's not going to win. And then all of a sudden, you saw the Kennedy family from Massachusetts, who was married to Arnold Schwarzenegger, coming in there, and you saw Ted Kennedy standing on stage with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which was the weirdest sight to ever see. To see the left-wing Democrat standing on stage with Arnold Schwarzenegger and this kind of thing, I had to turn the TV off. It was amazing. I couldn't grasp it. But now people realize, since that did happen, we're not going to take that for granted anymore. And I think that's one of the major reasons why you see this governor, who is not as hated as Gray Davis was. Gray Davis was hated by Democrats and he was hated by Republicans. Okay. He was just blah. This governor, he's had mistakes, but he's still flashy. He's still the kind of hip hop kind of guy, and he's well liked. And so I don't think that he's going to have the same kind of problem that Gray Davis had, because one, when it says if a dog bites you the first time, it's your fault. The bites you the second, well, his fault. Second time is your fault. So we got bit the first time, and we're not going to get bit the second time. We're going to fight on. USC.
Okay, so I have thoughts on this one too. So when it comes to that, I agree with Dr. Davis. I'm not sure California takes this one sitting down again. Whether they have opinions on either side, it's just way too close to midterms. It's way too close to a lot of things to really just kind of woof on this one. Just because it wouldn't take much effort to just put in the necessary things you need to do to just go ahead and put, Elder and the rest of them, Jenner, the rest of them just kind of out to pastures. Let's just move on and continue on. And because California has a lot of more issues to deal with than just worry about recalling a governor there and bringing in another one who are going to keep the same problems there. So I can't imagine them just, punting this one and seeing like, oh, let's just see what happens. I think they'll mobilize when they need to, when it gets close to the time, because like you said, it's California. So it's not like they can't just mobilize and the Democrats just show up whenever they need to. I guess my only question is, will they? I suspect, I hope, I predict they will, but we won't really know till that time comes.
And what's interesting is that a Newsweek poll actually said that Gavin Newsom is 18 points ahead of Larry Elder. Now, in any other state, that's a huge gap. But in California, to me, the dissatisfaction with what seems to be what the governor's position was in terms of the mask mandate and restaurants being closed, and him going out to eat at a very posh, very classy restaurant. I'm wondering if that was enough to upset the electorate, enough to translate into a lack of enthusiasm or a lack of support, because. Let's be real. It's California, so the story here is not how if the Republicans are going to get more votes, but if the Democrat enthusiasm will be reduced for Governor Newsom.
Yeah, I don't think it will. I don't like Dan was saying. I think this is just more of it's like a slap on the hand. Hey, you did this terrible thing. And we're going to hold you accountable for. I think it's more so just holding him accountable for it, more than them saying, hey, we're going to elect you out. I think it's more, or vote you out. I think that, this is just more of and I think this is, like I said, holding him accountable, but then also it's saying, hey, you need to stand on your campaign promises. We have a major influx of homelessness right now. What are you going to do about it? And I think that, this is a good time for Californians, because now it's, hey, you see, if you don't do these things, what we will do to you. So, now is the time to hold him accountable.
And I agree with what you said. It's definitely the time to hold him accountable, because when Democrats and especially I think a lot of minority voters do come out and support, we have, it's shown in the past that we have helped with winning the elections. And so I think that's a huge thing for him to keep in mind, so that when he does get elected, going back and serving those people that helped get you to that position, I think that'll be the biggest thing. So I think, definitely, I think every candidate has their flaws. I know I heard so much, especially with like the last election with Biden and stuff like that. A lot of people, didn't like certain things that he did. And that's understandable. I think that's going to come with any candidate. But I think also knowing when it comes down to it, if these are your options between these people, who's going to have your back when they're in office? And not only who's going to have your back, but how can you, thinking proactively, okay, once we get them in, how are we going to get our people in their cabinet? How are we going to get our people at the forefront to make sure that we're being heard? I think it's more so thinking in terms of strategy with him and getting him in.
I have to bring up one more thing. You have to bring up the race factor. In terms of the fact of who Larry Elder is, can an African American Republican actually win in California on a governor race, and that is an issue that has not necessarily been done in a regular race, a regular non recall race, and can an African American even take it to that level? Oftentimes, they are the ones to bring out the issues and do a lot of the dirty work against popular Democrats. They use different people that they go at them for them, but can they actually win? And that's something else when you consider they had an Arnold Schwarzenegger who was at the top fighting that before versus now Larry Elder. If you had a very popular person on the Republican side doing that, who also was very conscientious and wore a mask, maybe so. But with the fact that most of those Republicans can't even talk about wearing the mask and everything that they're doing, so they really can't throw that in his face. And then you have the race factor there that a lot of people haven't talked about. Well, can that person really carry the California makeup when majority of those who are African American are not in the Republican Party in California? And so therefore, that is not going to be the ones that are going to carry the day, and people are going to get off their jobs and rush too early to vote for Larry Elder in this day and time.
Only two gubernatorial recalls have ever been successful in U.S. history, and you have to go back to 1921 in the state of North Dakota, and then you got to go back to 2003, like we discussed. So the fact of the matter is the odds are way stacked against Larry Elder. But someone asked a question in the comments, what does this mean for Governor Newsom's possible political future if he was to run for president in 28 or beyond? I think when we're talking about these candidates, it's important to talk about their record too. You're talking about a governor who is very environmental friendly. You're talking about a governor who, implemented policies and programs to help reduce the crime rate and the homelessness rate, even though he's getting a lot of negative press by the GOP, who are blaming him for everything, the crime, homelessness, and the pandemic. You do have a governor who, for the most part, you're looking at the state of California's size, which, could be a country in itself. He's stirred a pretty stable ship, it seems. And any Democratic governor would want to have a resume like that if they were going to throw themselves into the ring for a future position, in my view. But I do want to turn, now that our time is really escaping us, to the ranked choice voting system that was implemented this year in the state of New York, specifically New York City, where voters were able to take advantage of this new system this past June for the primary of New York City's mayoral election. 90% of Democratic voters used it to pick a nominee for mayor. But there's an economic divide, it seems, that emerged between those who adopted the practice fully and those who did not. A study done by Politico actually conveys that when taken together, you have a successful rollout of this new system, but an uneven rollout. Because even though this program was pushed by the de Blasio administration and other influential groups and even the candidates themselves, you do have more affluent white parts of New York City able to benefit from this more than predominantly African American and Latino communities. I want to get your thoughts on this, what seems to be an economic, socioeconomic divide in the way in which this system was rolled out, and the implications that this possibly could have for New York's general election and future elections down the road. Anyone?
Well, my thoughts are this. Whether you have the traditional format or whether you have a new rollout, when it comes down to anything that adds extra to somebody's day when they're in the middle of a crisis, it is hard for them to deal with. I'm also a licensed clinical therapist. And when you are dealing with people who are in a crisis situation, whether there's financially crisis, family crisis, and anything else, for them to have to take a moment of their day to go vote on any level, it is very difficult for them to do. And so when you look at that, it is the reason why across the country, many people have added voting dates, voting centers, voting times, souls to the polls, all of those kind of things are remedies to try to work with people who have a lot of crisis in their life to go and do that. And so when we start changing our structures, whether it's a new polling system or whatever, it adds to people's stress. And when you add a stress to somebody's life who's already in crisis, it is hard for them to adjust. And that's not only to just African Americans, that's anybody in crisis. We are predominantly affected by that more than others. And so that hurts us. And that is exactly the reason why you have these other states trying to eliminate the souls to the polls and all the times and all the weekends, because they want to do it in a very short amount of time and those kind of things. Because when you do that, people in crisis do not have enough time to really remember to respond and take care of their own needs, because their biggest need is getting food on the table, taking their kids someplace and trying to find daycare and finding other issues, not going out to vote. While that should be in our minds the most important things to get them to have better things, a change in the voting system throws them off.
And I
Go ahead.
And adding to that too, I think definitely any changes in the voting system can be a big thing to throw people off. I know for me, when I started getting involved with politics politics in college, my freshman year when I went to A&T, and I remember that when I was there, our campus got split in half into 2 congressional districts. And so Congresswoman Adams, who was previously, the person for our campus, her district was split in half. And I remember just all the confusion surrounding it, because so many kids, we were like, okay, we'll wait for election day. A lot of people were like, oh, I did this growing up with my parents and et cetera. And what they did was, when they did that, there was 2 polling centers and everybody knew to go to the polling center off campus. But then there was one off campus, which people did not even know, or a lot of people, they were saying things, but not everybody was aware of. And so many students had to go off campus to the polls. And I remember hearing students that day, like, I'm not going to be able to make it to the polls in time. And it was really crazy how they did it, because the district, or the people that could not vote on campus were the underclassmen who didn't have cars. The upperclassmen who had cars were the ones that can vote on campus. And so I think, when just reflecting on my own personal experience with that, I can definitely attest to what Dr. Oliver is saying. I think any kind of change or disruption in the system, there's definitely people that can be impacted by it. And I think we need to, logistically, look through all of those things before making any kind of decision. And then if the decision is made, knowing what we can do to assist those people, especially with shuttles and vans, and how are we going to get out the communication to people? Because I think so many people, as I said, just did not know in general. And even with that, there's still the issue of, working, people have jobs, people have class, people have tests. And so I think it's not a simple decision. It's something that just, it has so many different layers and factors.
And in the remaining minutes, unless there's someone else who wants to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, elaborating off Blake and Dr. Davis, it was when we're talking about expanding access, what does that mean? Is the implementation of ranked choice voting the best way to, extend or increase access to the polls in relation to making it a federal or a state holiday, or more polling centers, or increasing the who can vote, most notably the incarcerated can't vote. So I'm when we have these conversations about specifically just these implementations of different ways to rank your preference for a candidate, it's just limiting ourselves, and I think by virtue playing into this conservative idea of like who has the right, the privilege, the opportunity to participate in our this democratic process, and leaving so many folk out, who disproportionately look like everybody who is a guest on this call. And I find that to be problematic.
Yeah, and I've been hearing a lot of folks saying, "Oh, this is going to be a bellwether of what the midterms are going to mean," or "This is what we talked about in California, the recall. We're talking about it now, this new system. What is this going to mean for future elections?" Folks, just a couple of weeks back, were saying, the administration's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan, that's going to damage Democrats. We don't know what is going to damage any side for the midterms. In this time and age, when you can have a dominant issue such as a pandemic or police brutality when it was George Floyd, or we really don't know what the defining theme for the moment of November of next year would be. And so it's very premature in my view, even though we're a year out, to make predictions and go ahead and say this is going to be the thing, because as soon as you're done with that sentence, something else happens and you're going to say that's going to be the thing, to cause folks to vote one way or the other. But I do think that, this is very interesting. You're looking at a system where the process allows voters to pick up to 5 candidates in order of preference. It's interesting to see such a divide even within a very, very blue city that is like New York City. But I do want to turn in the remaining minutes of this program to the fact that the United States is on the verge of commemorating 20 years since the September 11th, 2001 attacks. I want to ask you panelists if you would like to share your thoughts of where the United States stands 20 years after in terms of national security, our standing in the world. And also, if you'd like to give us some insight as to what your memories of September 11, 2001 were.
I want to go first. I was 5 when I was 2001. Yeah, 5. I was 5 years old. So I don't have, the most clear memories of that day in particular. Obviously, having gone to law school, we studied, in various courses very intimately, kind of the implications of the law, at least constitutionally, post 9/11. And I think my biggest concern is how the courts have, aided in this project of American empire and American imperialism overseas. So particularly with the AUMF, so authorized use of military force, and how that's kind of been parlayed into the indefinite detention of folk, overseas, or political prisoners that we've had, for example, in Guantanamo Bay, which is obviously a very important political issues for so many people. How this abrogation of Fourth Amendment rights and what does it mean, search and seizure, and this general idea of whether it's home or abroad, this idea of American policing. And at least when the United States chooses to police people, that's almost always, very seldom, if ever, not done towards Black people, brown people, indigenous people. So when we talk about where the United States stands, I'm worried. And I think, to answer the last point of like whether California is a bellwether, it's not necessarily a bellwether, but it does add fuel to the fire of what conservatives feel like they can achieve in the United States, at least, after 2016, after they get Gorsuch, after they get I'm forgetting names. I'm having a Rick Perry moment. But Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, there we go. So these very deeply conservatives, and Trump having the opportunity to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices. It's frightening, because I know what that means when ideologically conservative individuals have the opportunity to craft law not only at the Supreme Court level, just at all levels federally. And I see, the impacts of 9/11, this abrogation of civil liberties, to be an extension of that.
I guess I got the gray hair of the crew. I was in when we look at it, in year before 9/11, I was in New York. I was at a conference, and my roommate at this social work conference, we said, hey, a group of them are going over to the World Trade Center. And I said, I'm not feeling well tonight. I said, y'all go. I said, I come to New York pretty often. I'll go see the World Trade Center next year when I come back up here. He said, okay. And so the next year was 9/11. And I'll never get to see the World Trade Center. I think for me, one of the biggest things that I remember, that's when I go to Washington, D.C. now. My great grandmother lived in D.C. as a kid, and you can just go around D.C. You can go around the Capitol building and everything else. There was not that many police out there. And now when you look at it, all the bars, all the security, all the things you have to go through. And even now after January 6th, all the security, and you can't even go talk to a lot of your Congress people and everything else. So as every kind of crisis occurs, the amount of security, the amount of frustrations you have to go through now, the disconnect between the politicians and the people, it's becoming more and more real. And the fact is, the leaders at the time lied to us about who did the killing and those kind of things. And so the distrust in leadership, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, people don't trust local government, state government, and national government anymore. And because we were lied to, we went to a war where the people who we said did it didn't do it. And so all of those have implications into how we view and trust leaders on all levels of life, because our national pride was used to be misused and abused for that situation, and needless people died. So, but I thank God for all those who did fight for the first responders and everybody else who was out there. And it was the weirdest day to not see any planes in the sky. So it's amazing to see that. But yeah, I remember.
And Dr. Oliver, adding after you, I know you talked about like personal experiences and a lot. I know I was actually looking into this, and I read an article with it coming up, and it said that 93% of persons who are now over the age of 30 have a recollection of what of 9/11 and where they were. And I know for me, I think that's something that's pretty personal because we lived in New Jersey, in northern Jersey, and I have two younger brothers who are both autistic, and my one brother, because of his diagnosis, he went to a school that was actually at the very, very tip of North Jersey, next to New York. And I just remember my mom was doing my hair, and and then she saw the TV, and she just started freaking out because we didn't know where my brother was. His school bus driver wasn't answering the phone, and he was in school right next to New York. And my brother was like 5 years old at the time. Then on top of that, my grandfather used to work right around there. He was in the financial district in New York, and he was calling my mom at the same time with the buildings going down because he had friends that went to work that day. And I just know it was a really, really crazy experience for me personally, even looking back at it just with my family. So I think when you're definitely talking about personal experiences, Dr. Oliver, I know there are a lot of people that were definitely scarred from that day and still have memories. And I know that those are just my memories, but I can't even imagine how a lot of the people are feeling who actually lost family members and people that were close to them in that. So I think even with that, the recovery process and trust and betterment of the relationship between the people and the government, it's ongoing, and it's because something so massive happened.
I guess I'll go now. Yeah, Oliver, I think I was maybe 6 or 7 when that happened. All I remember, my dad is a paramedic, and he used to work for the FEMA disaster response team, and all I remember was him just being just off just the whole day. He came and got me from school, which was odd, and then I had to sit down in front of the TV. He explained that he would have to kind of leave for an extended period of time, not knowing why. This is before Katrina hit, because he had to leave during that one too. But he was gone. He was like, I'm not sure when I'm gonna leave. Just once things start coming out, you'll hear some things. You'll probably hear some people at school say some things. Just know that I'm going up there to help. No big deal. This country's safe. Like, it was just like a very reassuring time. Because everyone, especially down in Mississippi, were just freaking out. And you're like, where's the next spot? Everyone thought, they were going to start hitting bases, which Mississippi's full of just Army bases and Air Force bases around. So it was just all around, just kind of really awkward and kind of weird and unsettling, because we were kids. We weren't really sure, we didn't. I had experienced a lot of death at that time, and so I wasn't really sure what was happening. I just know teachers were scared. Everyone was scared. Nobody wanted to talk about it, but then they wanted to talk about it. Then my dad was gone. All I kept seeing was just kept seeing planes flying the buildings and stuff, and talking about death tolls. And I knew my dad was up there trying to help, stuff like that. And it's just crazy. It was just a crazy time, truly.
Well, I'll share. you know, there's some. Yeah, I think I was born a nerd of history, because there's the first two big historical events, American historical events I remember: Bush versus Gore in 2000. I was 4 years old, and I remember 9/11 because, my family had just moved to New York that same year, and my mom was a teacher for the school. My best friend, who had his mother actually worked in the World Trade Center, and for whatever reason, she was upset that she was late that day until she found out what was going to be unfolding later on. It hit home because, for me, I grew up after that saying I was going to be a firefighter, because firefighters always, especially in New York City, there was this kind of reverence that came with them. There was this idea that this is someone who's going to stand in the gap and help folks put themselves in harm's way and really leave a legacy if God forbid something happens to them, of self-sacrifice and doing the most that they can to help somebody else. And I thought it was very selfless, career, and it was the closest thing that you could ever get to being Spider-Man, saving folks. And taking field trips in New York and going to the Wax Museum and seeing different figures. And then there was a 9/11 exhibit, and there was this kind of reverence and awe, and looking at how New Yorkers, even on the subway, were even quiet and reverent. Usually folks are just passing each other by, no eye contact, no anything. But now it's like, good morning, how are you doing? This kind of comment, looking at how far we've gone to seeing, a bipartisan group of legislators on Capitol Hill singing the American national anthem, to now January 6th, as Dr. Davis pointed out. And those, a lot of these legislators, of course, not the exact same class, but you have legislators having the same office, refusing to have a hearing for these people for domestic terrorism, taking a strong stance when it comes down to global terrorism. But when it comes down to domestic terrorism, all of a sudden we wanted to murky up the waters and say it's a matter of politics. That doesn't take courage at all. And I think about this president's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. I think personally he did the best thing he could do, because he's had a front row seat to three presidencies: Bush, Obama. When Obama came in, they told him, look, if you focus on Marja, we can actually turn the tide here. Didn't happen. Trump, promising to obliterate ISIS and to, do what the past two administrations couldn't do before. And to try to, it's kind of like analogous to me to taking the bomb and like holding it down and letting it blow up on your watch. There was no, Professor Preston Foster mentioned this a few weeks back. There's no good way to lose a war, and there's no good way to leave, when you do lose that war, because you cannot set the terms under which you leave. And I think that played out. But I also think that him, by doing this, gives himself room to focus on the domestic side. And, a lot of folks didn't even know why we were there, America's longest war. After a certain time period, 10 years after Osama bin Laden, Guantanamo Bay serves as a stark reminder of the depths to which, when we make it a good versus evil war, how far we will go to justify what we consider good because we're the good guys. A lot of the rules and establishments and regulations that we led the way in setting up with the United Nations, we ended up violating during those early days of 9/11 and some years afterwards. So I think overall it's going to be seen as a time in which the United States lost its way, but hopefully we get back on track. But I ultimately want to thank each of you panelists for the wealth of knowledge and depth of experience you brought to the Political Mic tonight. Episode 45, I thoroughly enjoyed, and I enjoyed the conversation, the thoughtfulness of you. Thank you for dedicating time from your busy schedules. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude episode 45 of the Political Mic podcast. Thank you all so much.